Okay, so I'm going to talk about, and I'm moving ahead the time, since we have this extra time. Don't worry, I'm not going to use more than the time I have. And I will pass this extra time to the roundtable that we have later. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to look far into this whole through the 2020s, which is kind of a bold thing to do because, one can't fool oneself. It's impossible to know what the future may hold. But it is important to ponder and reflect, because I do believe that now, not just that empathy, but I think our industry knows enough to realize that there are some important, what I call puzzles, some important clues, some important signs that if you pay attention, they are revealing themselves right in front of us. And these clues, I see them as puzzles, are simply too important to neglect if you are trying to answer the question, where do you want to go as a company, where do you want to go as a team or a band, where do you want to go as an individual with your career? So I'm going to try and answer the question, where can we go as a company, as in the digital world, as a team and as individuals with our careers? And to do that, I'll present to you the following structure. I'm going to start by giving a light pass to what the industry says. By the industry, I mean the gardeners, the foresters, the analysts, of what is that we should be looking at for the next 10 years. Now, 10 years is a bold thing, I insist. And then I'm going to make a couple of reflections to that. And then I'm going to stop to, we say in the principles of empathy, you have to own it and communicate it and keep it simple. So I'm going to try and keep simple the process that I am communicating with you, that I have owned, of deciding where to go in the long run. That's the second part of the talk, where I present to you a story that connects. Of course, we're here to set what we want to do for the next 10 months, what objectives we have, and that needs to build a coherent story to where do we want to go in the long run. They need to connect, a whole story. And lastly, I will conclude by sharing with you an answer. Where can we go? And then, in 10 years' time, we can come back and watch this and whether I got it completely wrong or whether there is some sense in it. So, having said this, the 2010s have given us a lot of so-called innovations. A lot of stuff has been thrown our way. By that I mean our industry, our companies, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, blockchain, 3D printing, etc., etc., etc. Now, I'm always positive, and I, keep a good outlook on things. But as positive as one can be, when I look to the 2010s, I look back in disappointment, because I think the 2010s, and across and outside our industry, have glorified a lot of noise and a lot of so-called innovations on the promise to deliver unique competitive advantage to the companies that incorporate those things then and there. Now, I'm not saying that those things that you see in there and those estimations that you see in there will not be accurate, or whether those innovations will not be relevant. But what I'm pondering is that it's still an open question whether these things will be really impactful. And it is an open question, as it is an important one, because if you're trying to answer the question, where do you want to go as a team? Where do you want to go with your company in your digital endeavor? Where do you want to go as an individual with your career? If somebody is telling you that artificial intelligence is everything and everything is going to be algorithmic personalization and you embark on that and dedicate 3 years of your life, then this important decade in front of you could simply fly by if that wasn't that important. And for some of us, and I think for all of us, if we think in terms of opportunity, this decade is the most important of our careers. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because through the 2020s, a lot of noise, a lot of buzz is going to come our way. You bet on that. A lot of stuff is going to come our way in a golden tray, and somebody's going to say, take on this innovation, it's important for your career, for the team, for the company. And we might think data-driven and say, let me try it out, let me test it. Let's build a team, let's see what happens with this. Well, hell no. We're not going to do that. We're going to follow our instinct, we're going to attach our thinking, adhere the thinking to the vision, and understand before we go and try and invest energy and life, for that matter, without a clear purpose. So the question is, how do we build a map, a story that builds a coherent pathway for us to follow, as I say, as individuals, companies, and teams? And for that, I ask you to be open to this idea of pathways. I think of them, the way they seem to me, they seem as pathways, interconnected pathways. And when you look at them as a whole, and by that I mean the way they relate to one another, which is absolutely signifying, and independently, by that I mean the type and nature of each of these axes, clues, pathways, you can then be entitled to say, okay, I am understanding where things are going. And I can make a decision on what steps I'm taking for the next 10 months. Because in the long run, I can have a map and I can have a story. And this is what I'm trying to answer. How do we connect now and then? So consumers and brands, two axes, subject to extraordinary change. I'm not going to go through that to the level of detail I'd love to, because we have a round table right after this, and technology and data. Consumers and brands, technology and data. Let me center now for a moment. I'm going to go back to consumers and brands. And for each of these pathways, remember the purpose is to understand where can we go, where are we going. For each of these pathways, I'm going to propose to you 3 specific characteristics that I think have been defining into the understanding of where things are going. And for each of those characteristics, I'm going to suggest a pathway of change. So what are the 3 things that I think are being, and will be most definitive to digital tech? Remember, I'm talking on digital tech. Obviously, open source. Open source in technology is the most defining aspect, and this company, as thousands of other companies, owe to open source its existence. Without this crucial ingredient, none of this could have been possible. Open source, open libraries, open frameworks, open source communities and tribes that derive from it. Open source will continue to be absolutely definitive to the success of any company. Does this mean that object code companies that sell you licenses and they don't open their code will disappear? Well, they won't. They will be the status quo protectors, companies like Salesforce or Algolia for that matter. They will continue to have closed code, but they will not have an impact on the way the developer communities and create new products, which is the purpose of this. Open source will continue to evolve. And of course, in empathy, we're embarking in the notion of sharing code. At Carrefour, we enter on an engagement with a company, an enterprise components, and we give access to the source code. We don't understand a collaboration that honors transparency without that ingredient. The second defining characteristic is the notion of digital products. We all talk about this. At my time, we used to do information systems integrations, developing of systems, information systems, and now we do products. The notion of products powered by multidisciplinary teams. Of course, it's a defining characteristic of what is happening to digital tech. Some of you understand and came to the world of digital tech already with the notion of digital products that work in iterations and agile processes. Of course, that has been defining. But how is that going to change? Well, I'll propose in a moment. But it is a defining characteristic. And finally, of course, infrastructure as code, continuous development, deployment, continuous delivery, and everything that means to give to a developer infinite access to incredible computing power. All this has been a defining characteristic to create digital value. Those three things satellite the notion and the pathway of what digital tech provides. And I'm going to see now how this evolves. For data, I really can get carried away on this. Data, this has been the decade of data sourced out of spying people and surveillance. Well, that's gone. That's over. It's gone. It's not changing. It's just over. Second defining characteristic is the notion of attribution, the culture of data-driven. Data can answer every question, even the most complex human problems. Data can answer the way people feel. Data can answer people's behaviors. Data can answer social behaviors. Well, I'm sorry, somebody's been fooling us. That's not true. There are complex problems that data cannot solve. So the notion of linearity, causality, to understand what's happening to people is something that you cannot achieve with scientism and deterministic interpretation. There isn't such a thing as absolute certainty. There is a whole gap of space that you have to cover with creativity. That is core to our belief and to our success. And thirdly, regulation. What's going to happen to regulation? Is there going to be less regulation? There's going to be, of course, more regulation. But what's the consequence of it? Well, all of those, and I'm trying to keep this simple given the complexity, all of those will propagate in the following manner. I'm just going to refer to some. Digital products will evolve into no-code products. It's happening already. You will have teams of people who don't know how to code creating a product just through the usage of configurations. In a way, what we're trying to do with Motif is something like that. What we try to do with what you see is what you get. Controls is something like that. A marketer will be able to create a marketing campaign without involving any engineer, but the engineer has to have created the components that facilitate this. No-code products is a move that is already happening, and I think will propagate the sophistication of the concept of digital products, and is also a clue in this puzzle that we have to build on where we want to go. Clouds. Ramiro and company, we always refer to you guys. You guys will be deploying components into things. The notion of deploying things into clouds, as we'll see on the relationship brands and consumers, will be deploying things into devices, into cars, into Alexas, of course, into apps and phones, as we are doing already, but also into the notion of things. There will be similar concepts as continuous delivery deployment to access the Internet of Things, which is something I do believe in, of course, in correlation with the other pathways. Data. There will be companies like Phantom Analytics going like that. There will be companies like DuckDuckGo going like that. All these companies that have embarked on the notion of privacy are succeeding extraordinarily, but I'll touch on that later on the interconnection of brands and consumers. Attribution. The culture of data-driven culture, this data-driven deterministic angle will shift, and we are not swimming against the current anymore. You will be creating products that are designed to inspire creativity and to put deterministic data at the service of creativity and not the other way around. You will be offering insights, not just a report, but insights that are actually having an effect of the person who sees these insights and making them being creative, as opposed to being dictated what to do by data. And of course, regulation, what's the impact? Ownership is the impact, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So when I said that the key to succeeding in trying to understand where things are heading on this difficult task is to not only understand each of these pathways and the characteristics that define them, but we also have to think in terms of the relationships. Technology and data are pretty much mixed and in a process of separation. And they are in a process of bigger separation. There's a lot to talk on this topic, but not the time now. But frameworks like Solid, where the app doesn't hold any data, is a good sample of these. The association of data to the usage and not to the app service provider. That distance will continue to expand and go in proximity and satellite the creator of the data, who is the consumer, which brings us to this. Consumers and brands. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I really find it interesting. And consumers and brands and consumers, I think is the hell of a topic. But let me quickly extract the things that I think are worthwhile mentioning here. So, first of all, I think it's defining that we have gone through the digital transformation. Okay, nothing to say there. Second of all, first part of the decade, on the 2010s, has been devoted to pragmatism, to be able to deliver efficiencies. Amazon services, quality of services, is to do with efficiencies in the service. It's not about the product, it's about the efficiency of the service. It's about how useful it is. However, we already have clues that are starting to reveal themselves as we see the arrival on the late 2010s on the notion of experiences. It's not just about how something functions, it's about how it makes you feel. It's not just about what is that resolving, but it's about how is that solving your problem to set up your house, something that has to do with how you live, how you feel. There is another emotional aspiration, the whole notion of the experience economy, the whole notion of creating digital products that are capable of eliciting an emotional response has already commenced in the late part of the 2010s. And profit. Alberto was talking about this. Borja was talking about this. Of course, as Oscar Wilde said, it's not like this. I keep forgetting how is this quote exactly, but it was something like, there is no purpose in being a fantastic, celebrated character unless you have a continuous source of income. Something like that. You feel depressed if there's no cash. So profit is important, but profit is not everything. It needs to coexist with something else. And as I will touch on it right now. But those three characteristics, the unification of physical and digital, the transformation, have given an effect and a puzzle that we are going to touch on now. The convenience to experiences are already telling us where can we be as a team, as individuals, as companies. And the notion of profit not being enough and looking for another kind of meaning. And of course, now let me touch on consumers. Key things, access, information access, explosion, nothing to say in there. That consequence, the social consequence of the access to this explosion of information is choices. Freedoms like never before. The weird society of freedoms of choices. And of course, the very own individuals, we ourselves are contributors to this explosion of information, and we became, and we edit our lives as we're doing today through social media, etc. So where is this heading? First of all, I do believe, with a strong conviction, that there is a proliferation of brands and a specialization of brands and a strategy that many companies are creating many brands to be able to tackle. That proliferation is requiring a specialization. That specialization is having a trigger on having something else to offer than convenience. Also some relationship, empathy in the meaning infilling, aanvoelen, being able to project yourself into something aesthetically, and trying to aspire to become relatable as a brand and relatable to the consumer. So it's not just about how much money I save with this. It's about, and I go to profit, whether you agree in constitution to my values. Are you sustainable? Are you a company that cares? How do you treat people? Are you trustworthy? How do you feel about this topic? Are you ethical? those things, just 5 years ago, you were saying to people you wanted to think on those terms, and they were hearing, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm so sorry. But now this is changing. You're not going against the current. What you say, to me, is important to be sustainable. To me, it's important to be meaningful and think of something else than profit. Of course, two realities that need each other, kind of. And consumers, I think we are about to embark on the most dramatic transformation and a great opportunity to many small players, which is to do with the arrival of the digital identity. The same way you have your passport, that you can board a plane, that you can open a bank account, that you can send some money, you will have in your device, through biometrics, your passport, your digital identity. Key theme in Davos for the last 2 years. Already India has released 1.2 billion digital identity profiles. People on board planes with these identities, people open accounts. It's the country that has, since the arrival of this, the introduction of digital identities, the largest number of cash transfers. So digital identity, which, first time you hear it, if the first time you hear it, is your ID on your phone. Okay, it's a big thing. Yeah. Why is it a big thing? Because it's the inevitable trigger to arrive at self-sovereignty or ownership of your data. It's a massive thing because you can ensure your rights. And that's the catalyst to make a change that entitles to a fundamental transformation. And visibility, we don't trust, there are some exceptions here, I'm sure, but I don't trust Alexa or Google Home. I don't trust my devices. But what if I did? What if I have a digital identity that I can enforce and extend, augment to my devices? What if I trust Alexa and I bring Alexa to my sphere of privacy, to my circle of trust? What will Alexa do for me? Would I be okay if Alexa, I know I trust it, and it's not serving the objectives of Amazon, but serving my household? Will I let Alexa order my food? Will I let Alexa suggest for me some plan of holidays that makes sense to me, not to somebody else who has some spurious interest? So what will that mean for the Internet of Things? This is why I have reasons to believe that the Internet of Things, again, I'm looking ahead, 10 years, will be a defining change, and what you, Ramiro, are going to be deploying into devices. Joking aside, this is a fantastic change, and we'll discuss on that later. But it's not just about the type. It's not just about the characteristics, but it's about the relationships, because we sit there in the relationships between consumers and brands, or that's the potential we have. So what's happening to these relationships? Well, we have consumers that are now the driving force, and they are the sun, and everything goes around them, which is the brands, while it was the other way around. This is pretty much what has happened already. The proliferation of brands is extraordinary. They might come from the same maker, but it's extraordinary. The strength of the consumer, if we give them digital identities and we give them the ownership of their data, will pull in engagement with brands in different ways. Things will represent us. So where is this going? To answer the question that I have to answer, because that's what I have to do. I have to answer where do we go with empathy in the long run, so where we make decisions for the short run, they make sense, Let me tell you a little bit of the short run and the long run. There are two ways in which you can answer this question. Of course, you can think on this question, and please, I'd like you to be open to this, because it applies to you as an individual. Where are you going? It's kind of a big question, Where are you going? Yeah. And you can think in terms of the rationale. You can think in terms of the objectives. You can think in terms of the logic. You can think in terms of the schema of tangible things. Where are you going? Or you can also think in terms of your dreams. You can think in terms of your aspirations, those things that you wake up in the morning and you just have this incredible vision of where things are going, but there is no way you can put it into words. When you do, it loses the magic. So you have the dream, the aspiration, and then you have the objective. If you surrender to the objectives, you become objectives, which is obscene. And if you are only thinking in dreams, then you don't live reality. So both things are important, and they need to support each other. You start with a dream, you think how you articulate it, and then that articulation has to feed back to that dream. So where are we going? Where can we go? Well, to that question, now in reality, we have these components or these areas of action. We offer search. We offer context. We offer browse to some extent. What else do we do? Well, we are offering very successfully all the visualizations and insights, which tell a different story to the data. We offer playful controls to that we are trying to sophisticate. We also have interfaces that negotiate the way people feel about functioning, and they have that purpose, which is a way of landing that vision, which have been extremely successful. And we finally have an operating clouds, 2 at the moment, formally, in a productized way, which are AWS, Amazon, and Google Cloud. That's where we are. Now, how do we port this to the conclusions that one can infer from the reflections I shared a moment ago, looking far out? Well, we certainly have the notion of access. It's not just search, an explicit declaration. It's also the notion of access. I can access things implicitly. I can access my shopping. I can access my traveling. I can access my products, not just through the search box or clicking on a category option, but the notion that I should be participating on all touch points. That access could be triggered by a communication. That access could be triggered by a campaign page. That access could be triggered by a coupon. But that access could be triggered by any other means of representing a point of connection. So search, when you say, I want to take the lead on search, you have to ask yourself, what is search becoming and morphing into? And it's, of course, information access. So in the long run, it's not just about search itself or browse, but the notion of access as a whole. In the long run, I think we will be offering insights to the consumer. The brand will be offering insights to the consumer. So it's not about the brand spying on the consumer and creating insights so they make decisions on how to rip off the consumer. It's the consumer giving insights, the brand giving insights to the consumer so the consumer can understand herself or himself better. So the brand is helping the consumer to live their lives in accordance to their culture, their tribes. And we'll be creating products that will help companies to create products. We'll have no-code products, meaning that we can come to Music Magpie one day and we can say, here are the components for you to create a product, and you don't have to code, because this is too complicated otherwise, too costly, and we are facilitating this. That's a long-run aspiration, no-code products. You can use your vision to create your products. Where we think we can be with those no-code experiences, well, those no-code experiences should be able to be deployed in things, and they should be participating on things as well. Yeah? So that's the very long run, but what is in between? Well, in between is a much more sensible thing that connects coherently, I do hope, to that which we are setting as the objectives for the next 10 months. In between, if we are able to reach into the notion of access, we should be able to be much more successful and deliver value to browse, because browse, we do it incidentally. Let's face it, Product listing pages, and why not product detail pages could benefit from many of the emotive services connections that we're trying to do. So that's in between, towards that direction of access. In between, we have the unification of relevancy, something that we're going to talk extensively in a moment. What do I mean by this? Is that we ask the merchandiser to go to a tool to do something, to go to another tool to do something else, to go to another tool to do another thing. Well, that should be unified. We should go there where the merchandiser is and not ask the merchandisers to change their working space to be able to fulfill whatever it is that we are offering. Where are we heading to? Well, we're doing this with extensions. You'll see some of that later. We're giving more and more WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Also emotive, which is the pre-room to be able to offer no-code experiences and digital products that don't require code. That's the what you see is what you get side of things across the controls and the playfulness of search. Where are we going with this? Smart components, being able to split, to divide the potential that we have as a whole on the whole concept of empathy interface and be able to deliver it as builds of value across different spaces, for example, in a PLP. And lastly, of course, we need to continue in the standardization of the multi-cloud offering. So this comes back to the question. 6 months ago only, we said, in a moment of, as one does when you are achieving a big milestone, we said, God, we're doing really well. We should stop for a moment and think, where do we want to go? And we stopped to think from the rational perspective, and we said, well, in 4 years' time, we said back then, we want to be one of the top search companies out there. We want to be top of the charts. It felt like a really, man-made, rational interpretation of where to go. 6 months ago, that felt, pretty big ambition to have. And only 6 months later, we compete with companies that they pivot their value around sales. They are not search companies, they are sales companies. We don't have a sales organization or a sales structure. We compete with companies that are pumped up by venture capital, hundreds of millions of dollars that they have opened to be invested in. We pass on that for now. And we compete with companies that curiously, rather paradoxically, they look up to us. They come to us. You've seen some of those leaders in search come into our office asking us, how can we innovate with search? They look up to our culture. Well, we curiously look up to their revenue. We compete with companies that only a year ago were 10 to 20 times bigger than us in revenue, and now it's 5 to 10. So when you ask yourself, where do you want to go, and you think from the rational, and you think, well, I want to be one of those top companies out there, and then you realize that's in close proximity. That's not something that feels unattainable. That's something that we can do fairly easily, just adding up some of these steps that we're taking forward, which inevitably comes accompanied by yet another question, which of course comes accompanied by the many wise house and wise important parts. And you think, okay, so that's in close proximity. We can achieve that, but then what? Because you need to know where you're going. So this brings me to the next ideal. And with this, I'm closing on this. I'm sharing with you as my first audience openly on the thinking process that I want to make a part of it. I think, I placed it in that order, brand, consumer, consumer, brand. I do think that now we know that we can play a role more significant than search itself, and we can act as taking the lead on the brand-consumer, consumer-brand relationship wherever it takes place. Sometimes it will happen in proximity to the consumer, sometimes it will happen in proximity to the brand. But I think we should reset the rational side of the goal and think in terms of an aspiration, yet attainable, but long for an aspiration that goes beyond search. And one last thought. If you say, I want to be on the top of what search is, you have to understand what search will become. It's morphing so fast and so rapidly. Everything is changing, which is one of the challenges that we have, how we can keep pace with that. You cannot say, I'm going to be the leader of something that you don't know what is it morphing into. Well, I think search is morphing into this notion of access and the relationships between brands, consumers, and brands, with all the pivots that I have presented to you a moment ago. So that's the thinking I wanted to make you participative of, and I'll be looking forward to talk with you on any of these ideas. And that's what I do at 4 in the morning when I wake up. Some of you ask me, what do you do of waking up at 4 in the morning? Well, I think of this. And that's all I wanted to say. So thank you so much. Thank you.